Imagine willingly handing over your entire life to one man. Your money, your name, your body, your children. Now imagine that man has no medical degree, but decides to perform surgery on you anyway, with a wire saw, while you're awake. This is not a horror movie. This is not fiction. This happened in the forests of rural Canada, less than 200 miles from Toronto, and most people have never heard of it. His name was Roch Thériault. His followers called him Moise, and what he built deep in those woods was so disturbing that when police finally raided his commune, seasoned investigators were left speechless. This is the story of the Anthill Kids, and I promise you, you are not ready for what comes next. To understand how something this evil happens, you have to understand the man at the center of it, because monsters rarely look like monsters at first. Roch Thériault was born in 1947 in a small rural town in Quebec, Canada. He grew up poor, deeply religious, and hungry for something more. He was largely self-educated, never finished school, but he was sharp, dangerously sharp, and he had something that can't be taught. Charisma, the kind that makes people feel seen, chosen, special, like you've been waiting your whole life to meet this person and didn't know it until right now. He started out as a lay preacher in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and for a while it worked. People liked him, people followed him. But the church eventually kicked him out, and the reason is telling. He was too extreme, even for them. But instead of that stopping him, it fueled him. He began to believe he wasn't just a preacher. He wasn't just a messenger. He was a prophet. Specifically, he became convinced he was the reincarnation of Moses. He even started going by the name Moise, which is simply Moses in French. And here's what made him truly dangerous. He didn't just believe it himself. He made others believe it too. By the late 1970s, he had gathered a small but devoted following in Quebec. Mostly young people, mostly lost, mostly searching for meaning, for community, for something to hold on to in a world that felt cold and indifferent. And Roch gave them exactly that. At first. He was warm. He was passionate. He had answers to every question. He made you feel like the outside world was the problem, and this group, this family was the solution. That's always how it starts. Not with fear, not with violence, with love. By the late 1970s, Roch had a problem. He was preaching the end of the world, a coming apocalypse that would wipe out modern civilization. And if that was true, and his followers absolutely believed it was, then they needed to get out of the city. They needed to survive. So Roch made a decision that would seal the fate of everyone who followed him. They were leaving, all of them, together. He gathered his group, at this point around 40 men, women, and children, and led them deep into the wilderness of rural Ontario, to a remote patch of land near a tiny town called Burnt River. And there, in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by trees and snow and silence, they built a world from scratch. No electricity, no running water, no contact with the outside world. They cleared land by hand, built shelters by hand, grew food, raised animals, chopped wood, all of it by hand. And the settlement they built was constructed into the side of a hill. A hill that happened to be covered in anthills. That's where the name came from, the Anthill Kids. It sounds almost charming, doesn't it? Almost innocent. It was anything but. From the moment they arrived, Roch began tightening his grip. Everyone surrendered their possessions, their money, their identification. Their connection to the outside world was completely severed. He gave people new names, assigned them roles, decided who worked, who ate, who slept, and who was punished. He took every woman in the group as his wife, every single one. He would go on to father more than 20 children within the commune. And the outside world had no idea any of this was happening, because out there in those woods, completely cut off from society, Roch Thériault was no longer pretending to be Moses. He was acting like God. And in that commune, with no one watching and no one coming, he could do whatever he wanted. Here's something that people always ask when they hear stories like this. Why didn't they just leave? It sounds simple. It sounds obvious. You're an adult. You have legs. You can walk away. But that's not how coercive control works. And what Roch Thériault built inside that commune was one of the most sophisticated psychological control systems ever documented in a cult setting. Let's break down exactly how he did it. Step 1 was isolation. They were already in the middle of the wilderness. No phones, no neighbors, no way to contact family or friends. The outside world wasn't just distant, it was portrayed as evil, corrupt, dangerous. Roch told them constantly that out there was death, and in here was salvation. So leaving didn't just mean walking away from a group. It meant walking into what you'd been told was the end of the world. Step 2 was identity destruction. When you take away someone's name, their possessions, their history, their connections, you take away their sense of self. These people stopped being individuals. They became extensions of Roch. And when you have no identity outside of the group is all you are. Step 3 was manufactured dependency. Roch controlled the food. He controlled the shelter. He controlled who slept and when. Basic survival became something he granted or withheld at will. Hungry? That depends on Roch. Safe? When a person controls your access to food, warmth, and safety, your brain stops thinking about freedom. It starts thinking about survival. And survival means staying close to the source of those things, even if that source is also the threat. Step 4 was the most diabolical of all. Roch made members punish each other. When someone broke a rule, and the rules were constantly changing so someone was always breaking one, it wasn't just Roch who administered the punishment. He made the other members do it. He made friends hurt friends, made people who loved each other cause each other pain. And this was calculated. Because once you have hurt someone you love on orders from a man, you are now complicit. You can't leave and report him without also reporting yourself. You can't condemn him without condemning your own actions. Your guilt and his guilt become tangled together until you can't separate them. And the bonds of trust between members, the friendships, the relationships that might have given someone the courage to leave, were systematically destroyed, until the only person anyone could turn to was Roch. And then came the sleep deprivation. Members were kept awake for days at a time during spiritual sessions, long rambling sermons that went through the night and into the next day and the next night. A sleep-deprived brain cannot think critically. It cannot plan. It cannot resist. It can only endure. And enduring meant agreeing, nodding, believing. By the mid-1980s, the people living on that commune were not the same people who had walked into those woods. They had been systematically dismantled and rebuilt in Roch's image, loyal, fearful, dependent, and completely unable to imagine a world without him, which meant that what came next had no one to stop it. It started small, the way it always does. Early punishments were humiliating, but not physically severe. Extra chores, public shaming in front of the group, being forced to confess invented sins while everyone watched. But Roch was testing something. He was testing how far he could go. And every time he went further, nobody stopped him. So he went further. Members began to be beaten for minor infractions, speaking out of turn, questioning a decision, showing what Roch decided was insufficient devotion. Women were tied to trees overnight in the Canadian winter, left in the freezing dark for hours, sometimes longer. He began pulling members' teeth, not because they were infected, not for any medical reason, with a hammer and pliers, as punishment. And the group watched. And the group said nothing, because by now the control was so complete, the identity so destroyed, the dependency so total, that this had become normal. That is the most terrifying sentence in this entire story. This had become normal. But then Roch developed a new obsession. He became convinced that he had healing powers, divine medical abilities granted to him by God. He began performing surgery with no training, no sterile equipment, no anesthesia. A member would come to him with an infection, an injury, an illness, and Roch would operate on the kitchen table with whatever tools were available, basic instruments, wire, farm equipment, while others held the patient down. And here is where the documented cases become almost impossible to process. A woman named Solange came to him with an infected arm, a real infection, the kind that needs antibiotics. The kind that in any normal circumstance would mean a quick trip to a doctor and a prescription. Roch decided she needed surgery. He amputated her arm with a wire saw while she was conscious, while the group watched. Solange survived, and she stayed, because where was she going to go? With one arm, in the middle of the wilderness, with no money, no identification, no connection to the outside world. A baby became ill inside the commune. Rather than seeking medical attention, Roch performed a ritual. The baby did not survive. This would become one of the charges against him. And then, there was Gabrielle Lavallee. Gabrielle had been one of his followers for years. And over those years, she had been subjected to escalating abuse that is almost impossible to list without stopping to breathe. Beatings, burnings, a fork driven into her hand, her toes broken one by one. On one occasion, Roch inserted a wire into her body and electrocuted her. And then one day, Gabrielle came to him with an infected hand, and Roch decided she needed the same treatment as Solange. He amputated her arm, without anesthesia, without proper tools, without mercy. And when it was over, something shifted in Gabrielle Lavallee. Something that Roch's years of control and fear and pain had not managed to extinguish. A will to survive. A decision. Enough. It was 1989. Gabrielle Lavallee had one arm, no money, no ID, no phone, no map, and she was in the middle of the Canadian wilderness. By any logical measure, she had nothing. But she had made a decision. And sometimes a decision is the only thing that matters. We don't know exactly how she got out. What we know is that she ran, through the trees, through the cold, through everything Roch had spent years building inside her head. The fear, the dependency, the belief that the outside world was worse than what was in those woods. She ran through all of it, and she didn't stop until she reached people, until she reached safety, until she reached police. And when she sat down and told them what had been happening inside that commune, the officers listening to her had to stop and process what they were hearing. Because this wasn't happening in a distant country. This wasn't history. This was happening right now. Less than 200 miles from Toronto, in the forests of Ontario. To Canadian citizens, police moved quickly. In 1989, they raided the Anthill Kids commune, and what they found when they walked into those woods confirmed everything Gabrielle had told them, and then some. The conditions were beyond anything they had prepared themselves for. Members were malnourished, injured, psychologically shattered. There were graves, children who had been born inside the commune and had never seen the outside world. Women who had been surgically mutilated by a man who believed God had given him the power to heal. And, at the center of it all, Roch Thériault, who did not run, who did not panic, who looked at the officers who had come to arrest him and remained completely calm, because in his mind, he had done nothing wrong. The arrest was just the beginning of the legal nightmare, because here is something that will make your stomach turn. When the case went to trial, some of his followers testified in his defense. People who had been beaten, starved, mutilated, stood up in a courtroom and defended the man who had done it to them. That is the lasting power of coercive control. That is what years of systematic psychological destruction looks like when it walks into a courtroom. That is why we cannot simply ask why they didn't leave. But the justice system did what his followers could not. In 1993, Roch Thériault was convicted of murder for the death of the infant inside the commune. He was also convicted of multiple counts of aggravated assault, and he was sentenced to life in prison. He would never lead another commune. He would never perform another surgery. He would never take another name from another person. Most cult leaders, when they go to prison, fade away. The followers scatter. The mythology dissolves. The man behind the curtain is revealed to be just a man, powerless, forgotten. That is not what happened with Roch Thériault. From behind bars, Roch continued to receive visitors. Not just anyone. His followers. The same women he had beaten, controlled, mutilated. They came to see him. They wrote him letters. They continued to profess their love for him. Years after the trial, years after everything that had come out in court, years after the world had seen exactly what he was, they came, Because that is what trauma bonding looks like at its most extreme. Because the psychological chains Roch had built were stronger than any prison walls. And Roch knew it. Inside the prison walls, Roch was doing what Roch always did. Finding vulnerable people, building influence, establishing control. He was charming to guards, manipulative with inmates, always watching, always calculating. On February 26, 2011, at age 63, Thériault was found dead near his cell at Dorchester Penitentiary. His death is believed to be the result of an altercation with his cellmate, Matthew Gerard MacDonald, a 60-year-old convicted murderer from Port-au-Port, Newfoundland and Labrador, who was charged with the killing. MacDonald pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison, having already been serving a life sentence for a previous murder charge. MacDonald had stabbed Thériault in the neck, walked to the officer's station, handed them the weapon, and proclaimed, "That piece of shit is down on the range. Here's the knife. I've sliced him up." Gabrielle Lavallee went on to write a book about her experiences titled The Ant Hill Kids. She has spoken publicly about what happened inside that commune. She has given a face and a voice to a story that could have easily been buried in the Canadian wilderness forever. Because of her courage and her decision to run that day with one arm and nothing else, the world knows what happened in those woods. The other survivors scattered. Some rebuilt their lives. Some never fully recovered. Some carried the psychological weight of those years for decades. The children who were born inside the commune and had never seen the outside world had to learn everything from scratch. What a store was, what a school was, what normal felt like. Some of them are adults now, living ordinary lives, carrying extraordinary scars. The bigger question, here's what I want to leave you with. Roch Thériault was not a supernatural being. He had no special powers. He was not chosen by God. He was a man. A deeply disturbed, extraordinarily manipulative, profoundly evil man. But a man. And yet, he convinced dozens of intelligent, capable, searching human beings to surrender everything to him. To hurt each other for him. To defend him in court. To visit him in prison. To let him operate on them with a wire saw. How? Because he understood something about human nature that most of us don't want to admit. That the need to belong, to be chosen, to have answers in a confusing world, is one of the most powerful forces inside us. And in the wrong hands, it can be used to destroy us completely. The Ant Hill kids weren't weak people. They weren't stupid people. They were human people, and that is the most frightening thing about this story. If this story made you feel something, if it made you think, if it made you want to understand how something like this happens so that it never happens to you or someone you love, then share it, because these stories deserve to be heard.